Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for the audience who is watching us worldwide. I'm very honored to start the panel of climate change and energy transition in our ninth conference of BRICS from the BRICS study group of the University of São Paulo in Brazil. We are here with the keynote speakers who will share their thoughts and their experience on the climate change and energy transition, a paramount discussion nowadays, especially now that we are discussing about BRICS, who basically is comprised of 40% of the total population and a quarter of the global GDP. We cannot discuss anymore economy without discussing about sustainability. We can see that basically shared innovation and sustainable practices are part of all the international summits that have been going on, because we know what are the challenges from the high temperatures to the rising sea levels, from the floods and droughts and etc. So we have to highlight the importance of the clean and the green energy, including solar, wind power, electric mobility, and so on. So I'm here with all our keynote speakers, international keynote speakers, and I will start by introducing Senator Mushahid Hussain. Senator Mushahid Hussain has served as senator, editor, cabinet minister, and university professor. Till recently, he was chairman Senate Defense Committee, and during 2015 to 2018, he served as chairman Parliamentary Committee on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the CPEC, where he played a pivotal role in promoting the CPEC, the flagship and pilot project of the Belt and Road Initiative, and consensus on CPEC among provinces and political parties of Pakistan. Senator Mushahid Hussain has been Minister for Information, Culture, and Tourism. He has a master's degree in international relations from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service at Washington, D.C. in US. He was also the youngest editor at the age of 29 of a major national English daily newspaper named The Muslim, published from Islamabad, which has respected for its independent positions during the military regime. He served on the faculty of the Political Science Department of the Punjab University, South Asia's oldest seat of learning. He was also leader of Pakistan delegation to the United Nations Human Rights Commission at Geneva. Senator Hussain has been awarded the prestigious Practitioner in Residence at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Washington, D.C. for the academic year 2023-2024, where he lectures and mentors senior students on international relations. China's President Xi Jinping personally conferred on him the prestigious 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence Friendship Award at Islamabad on April 20, 2015. Senator Mushahid Hussain was elected in his personal capacity of 2 important global positions, co-chairman of International Conference of Asian Political Parties, the largest and oldest organization of Asian political parties, Vice President of the 10th-member Human Rights Committee of Inter-Parliamentary Union, representing Asia in the biggest organization of parliaments of the world at Kigali, Rwanda. So I'm glad, as the moderator, my name, is José Ricardo. I am glad to pass the word to the senator, who I'm very proud to say that besides all these extensive qualifications, is a great friend, which I always have the pleasure to learn about his life experiences. Thank you very much for joining us, Senator Mushahid Hussain.
Thank you so much for your very kind words, Professor Ricardo, my friend, my compañero from Brazil. And first of all, good luck to you in the upcoming COP30 conference, which is being held in Brazil next month. My greetings from Pakistan to all the distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the panelists on this important webinar organized by the University of Sao Paulo. And I think that this issue of climate change is of paramount importance because it is borderless, affecting the world and humanity at large. In my presentation, I will first try to give you the big picture and then focus a little bit on Pakistan, South Asia, and how the world is being transformed by the issue of climate change and energy transformation. When we look at the big picture, we see some three fundamental realities. China has now assumed the role of leadership on the issue of climate change and energy transition. That is the first fundamental reality. The second fundamental reality is that the United States of America under President Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement on climate change, and it has officially stated that the issue of climate change, according to President Trump, is a hoax. That means he does not recognize climate change as a relevant issue for the United States of America. So the US is now abdicating its responsibility nationally and globally on the issue of climate change and energy transition, thereby creating a vacuum. And the third reality is, and I've attended various COP meetings in Glasgow, in Sharm el-Sheikh, other parts of the world. In the parliament also, I've been in the climate change committee, organized public hearings. The international community, which gave certain commitments, especially to countries in the global south, pertaining to climate financing, those commitments have not been met. So there is a gap between what is said and what is delivered. So promises, commitments on climate change, on alleviating the consequences of climate change, on helping countries, especially in the global south, which are most vulnerable to climate change, those commitments have not been met. So this is the overall global picture. A few words first on my own country, Pakistan, where I'm located. We are a country of 250 million people in South Asia. We are the fifth largest country which is vulnerable to climate change. We have had Pakistan, that is, in the last 30 years, 150 freak weather incidents, flash floods, glacier melting, extreme heat, massive floods, forest fires, so all kinds of issues. And in the last 15 years, we have had three major floods, which affected 30% of Pakistan's population in different provinces of Pakistan in 2010, in 2012, in 2022, and last year in 24. And the last flood it cost about almost $33 billion loss, and about 30% of our population was homeless or displaced or affected. When we come to South Asia, as I said, climate change is a borderless issue. And South Asia is 1/5 of humanity. It includes Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal. In this region, Nepal is landlocked. They had a cabinet meeting on the Mount Everest, which is the highest peak in the world, to demonstrate that the melting glaciers can affect the future of landlocked Nepal. Maldives, which is a small island, cluster of islands, is affected by global warming. Because if the temperatures rise, the water level goes up. In 50 years, Maldives can cease to exist. God forbid. So they had a cabinet meeting underwater to show that this is how serious the threat is. And 500 million people living on this coastline, which is almost population of 1.8 billion in South Asia, they can be affected on the coastlines by global warming and climate change. In Pakistan, in India, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Maldives. So this is the level of threat just in our part of the world. And I've been reading in different magazines about Latin America, your part of the world, where they say that Latin America is now becoming more drier, more warmer, more flammable. So this is an issue which goes beyond everything. And now when we talk of the energy transition is very, very pronounced. Let's look at some of the figures. On issues of electric vehicles, issues of renewable energy like solar and wind power, or the electric batteries, China has emerged as the undoubted leader. Now, in 2024, China produced and sold 11 million electric vehicles. 11 million, which is 50% of the world's production. In 2025, so far, till October, China has produced 72% of the world's electric vehicles so far. China is now producing 80% of the world's solar panels. China is producing 60% of the world's wind power turbines. So this is, if you see that when we talk of the global transition in energy, China is already up there. Because I also have a think tank which is called Pakistan-China Institute, and you mentioned about Xi Jinping's award. I have been visiting China regularly, and that's where we met Professor Ricardo, because he's also a China expert. So we discussed and exchanged notes on these issues. Now, when we look at the big picture also, the energy transition in the world that we talk about is also, I think, linked with the global transition, the shift that is taking place in the global center of gravity in terms of politics and economy from the West to the global South. And the global South includes Asia, Africa, Latin America. And BRICS is one component of that. We have, in our part, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, also regional organization. So these are major pillars, building blocks of the new emerging reality. Then also in science and technology and in economy. Last week, I was seeing the new magazine, maybe some of you have read it in English, The Economist. They had a cover story where they said China is winning the trade and tariff war against the United States. And this was a Western story. And also in terms of technology, it's not just technology for climate change or energy. And I mentioned those figures to you just now. For example, Chinese company is called BYD. It's a electric car company. BYD means build your dreams. BYD. That is overtaking Tesla. Tesla is a big company of Elon Musk. It was number one. Last year, BYD overtook Tesla in terms of mass production. So when we talk of competition, and already I've seen studies which have said that I saw a recent study in Harvard University, United States of America. It's 52 pages, The Great Tech Rivalry. China versus the United States. That's the title. You can find it on the internet. What does it say? It says that China is overtaking the United States in high-tech manufacturing. Electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines, artificial intelligence, 5G, cloud computing, robotics, STEM, S-T-E-M, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So it's a whole new situation that is emerging. The global transition is now shifting, because previously, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was the West, Europe and the United States, which were in the lead in technology, and technology, not just a technology for automobiles or technology for industrial development, but technology particularly pertaining to climate change. That has now changed. And the shift is now towards our part of the world. where Brazil is, where Pakistan is, where India is, where other African countries are, South Africa, where other. So this is a very historic shift. Now, these are important issues that will be tackled. And your country, in Brazil, at I think 10th of November to 21st of November is COP30. But the important issue for global South, for countries like Pakistan, which are vulnerable, I would like to just place on the table. Number one is climate finance. Commitments have been made, promises have been made, but the promises have not been kept. The commitments have not been kept. So I think that is number one. That should be number one in there. Secondly, I think there should be transfer of technology to countries in the global South, so we have access to cheap energy technology that can make a difference to people's lives, not just in the cities, but also in the rural areas. And I think that is going to be extremely important. And that should be made available. And number three, I think on this global CO2 ambitions also, like for example, Pakistan, we only contribute 0.7% to global emissions, but we are the fifth largest country. So we are the victims of climate change. So I think that some sort of a special fund needs to be made for the victims of climate change, who are facing the consequences of climate change because the West industrialized. They built up their economies at our expense. They used coal, they used all kinds of thermal energy, but now we are being advised otherwise. So I think there has to be some sort of climate justice also. The issue of climate justice should also be on the agenda, in my view, when COP30 takes place. So I think if with this agenda, at least the global South and countries which are most vulnerable in global South, they should then be compensated, and at least they can be part of the global development. I thank you all for your patience, and I thank my good friend, Professor Ricardo, for taking a very timely initiative and also for honoring me with this invitation. I feel very honored, and it's a pleasure. And I am sure that this conference will be a great success, and I wish you good luck for the Brazil COP30 conference starting on 10th of November. Thank you so much, all of you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Senator. It's again a pleasure and an honor for us to listen to your thoughts and copying what Senator highlighted during his presentation. There is a gap from what is said and what is delivered. And we should think also about a fund for what's so-called the climate justice. So this is something that we have to highlight and we have to think about for the near future. And the screen of the senator just turned to pink during the backdrop turned to pink during his presentation. So it's also part of what we call in the climate change, a big change in terms of temperature here. And thanks again, Senator. I will now pass the word to Professor Andrea Doria. Let me read her mini bio here. Andrea Doria is a communications consultant at COP30, the 2025 United Nations Climate Conference. She's a PhD candidate in the graduate program in international relations at the university and the Federal University of Bahia State in Brazil. She's a researcher founded by FABESP, a winner of the Federal University of Bahia Award in the dissertation 2022 category in the human science knowledge area for her work entitled The Transversality of Gender in World Bank Studies and Investments, an analysis of the Woman, Business, and the Law reports, 2020-2021. Supervised by Professor Dr. Denise Vitale. She's a journalist and a publicist with a degree in social communication from the Fundação Armando Álvares Penteado, FAAP, She also has an MBA from the Escola Superior de Propaganda e Marketing, ESPM. She is a coordinator of the Gender and Sexuality Equality Commission of the Brazilian Association of International Relations, a member of the research group BRICS, the BRICS study group of University of São Paulo, also from the NEP BRICS from the Federal University of Bahia State, and of Lab Mundo from the Federal University of Bahia. She's also a member of the Brazilian Association of International Relations and the Brazilian Association of Political Science. She's a scholarship student at BRICS Plus Salvador Summer School 2025. And last but not least, she is attending the COP30, the COP30, and she will share her valuable thoughts now. Thanks a lot for joining us, Professor Andrea Doria.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you all for being here in this morning, so early for us in Brazil. But my proposal today is to address the dichotomy of energy transitions and its direct relationship with inequalities, especially gender inequality. It stems from 3 points. Please, if can anyone put my presentation on screens, I'd be glad. I think my speech will be talking directly with the speech of the senator, because I will talk about this gap about promise and the actions, deliveries. Just a minute, if you can put, I try to put here just my presentation. Let me see.
1 second.
Thank you. Because I have some issues here with my internet. I'm sorry.
No problem. It's completely fine. It's part of the online transmission always.
It's okay, Luisa? Could you put?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
If you want, you may start, Andrea, while she's double checking your slides, please.
So, how I told my proposal here is today is address. Can you, the next, please? To address the dichotomy of the energy transition and its direct relationship with the inequalities, especially gender inequalities, stems from 3 points. The first point, if you could put, the next slide. The first point to be energy transitions versus fossil capitalism. Even with the progress in leaders' speeches and projects in favor of the energy transitions, the rate of consumption of fossil fuels, as well the prospecting and exploitations, has not shown signs of decline. The slides before, please. The second one, will be the energy transition evaluated only from an economic point of view does not consider the impacts of its implementation on affected communities or the environmental impacts of these new energy sources. And the third will be the commodification of nature and its annexation by capital, both as a source of inputs for production and as a drain to absorb its waste. So what does this mean? Within the BRICS context, for example, when you look at how member or partner countries are addressing the issue, it's become evident that the speech is far from the practice, like the senator said before. Please, next slide. I'll bring some slides, some example here. Next slides, Luisa, please. Thank you. When we take a look at some BRICS Plus countries and partners, we can see examples like Indonesia, where renewable energy represents 30% of its energy mix, but the country continues to expand the use of fossil fuels, especially coal. And you have South Africa, China, and India The dependence on coal in the energy mix remains high. And in the case of the late two, China and India, with a strong dependence on imports. So you have 6 of the 10 largest oil producers: Brazil, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Iran, that represented 45% of global production in 2023. India, in the third largest, is the third largest energy consumer in the world, behind only China and the US, despite having a strong dependence on imports of energy inputs. And China and Brazil, that are the 2 largest countries in terms of installed hydroelectric capacity in the world. Russia is in the 5th place and India in the 5th. You have Ethiopia, that is committed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 64% by 2030. However, despite its energy matrix being predominantly hydroelectric, oil represents about 10% of its energy mix. Please, next, Luisa. So you have Egypt launched the National Climate Change Strategy to 2050 and update its NDC in 2022, committing to achieve 42 renewable energy in the electricity mix by 2030. However, it has a strong dependence on natural gas and still lives significantly in the production and the exploration of new oil and gas fields. And you have Emirates updated its NDC in 2023, committing to reduce emissions 47% by 2035 compared to 2019 levels, while the country invests in solar energy, nuclear energy, and carbon capture technologies aiming for carbon neutrality by 2050. It continues to expand its production of fossil fuel. And you have Saudi Arabia. It's not a member. You are looking for the next chapters of this novel, but it's a partner. And it has an energy matrix in 100% depends on fossil fuels, with a projected increase in energy demand, including oil and natural gas until 2030. And you have South Africa and Russia, and among the main exporters of coal in the world. And how you know, most countries in the global south face a challenge related to financing and the need for international support to achieve the climate goal. These examples make it clear that in practice, the reality of the energy transition is still far from leaders' speech. Furthermore, the fact that we are seeking new sources of clean energy does not necessarily mean that we will not have impacts. I'll try a real example. A real example is the wind energy farm, with the impact the lives of residents in their surroundings due to extreme noise, in addition to affecting the environment, causing changes in local vegetation, destructions of flora, impact on bird migration routes, and animal death. So you need to think more about how this transition will be, how we can make this transition, because it has some impacts too. Next slide, please. But what's the relationship between energy transition, inequality, and the role of nature in capitalism? These three issues are intricately interconnected, and the last two, nature and inequalities, are fundamental to the function of capitalism, since they are both structural and structuring elements of the system. Regarding gender, it is understood that the gender inequality permeates cultural, legal, and economic issues. it is also linked to the consequences of climate change. According to the UN, the climate change conflicts in the countries, the climate crisis, and the COVID-19 pandemic are delivering a triple blow to the rights and safety of refugee, internally displaced, and stateless women and girls until now. So please, next, Luisa. Today, worldwide, you have 740 million women worldwide working in the informal economy, and 8% of the world's domestic workers are women. According to the World Bank, the global average of women's legal rights was 64% compared to the rights guaranteed to men. And the average global proportion of legislative seats held by women is only 1/3 compared to those held by men in the world. Interestingly, the Leaders' Declaration published at BRICS Summit in Rio de Janeiro this year mentioned climate change, sustainable development, and gender inequality. But these three themes did not necessarily appear directly connected in the document. Please, next slide. So I will bring some highlights from the declaration. I counted. Mentions in text, climate change, 60 occurrence. Sustainable development, 29 occurrence. Women, 25 occurrence. But when you link it with sustainable development, was only 2 occurrence. And when you link it with climate change, only 1 occurrence. And climate justice, 0 occurrence. And dimensions are distributed across the 5 topics of the declaration. And another highlight, indigenous peoples, only 3 occurrences, and the local communities, 2 occurrences. So please, next slide, Luisa. And the main focus of dimensions of women was equitable representations, international organizations, okay, and in the process related to peace and security. And the next one was gender equality as part of the BRICS plus principles, whatever this means. Doesn't explain what is this, but it's like a beautiful phrase in the document. And the main focus of the main shows of sustainable development was economic pillar, cooperation for inclusive growth, 2030 agenda, linkage to the sustainable development goals, and climate finance related to sustainability. And the main focus of the mentions of climate change was commitments to the Paris Agreement and COP30, criticism of the developed countries for not committing to necessary financing, and the launch of the TFFF at the COP30 that we're expecting in the next weeks in November. So note that despite being included in the declaration, the issue of gender, indigenous people, and local communities are addressed separately from climate change and sustainable development. In this scenario, like Nancy Fraser brings in cannibal capitalism, I agree with her. I understand that the current crisis does not fit the typical models we have inherited. It's a multidimensional crisis encompassing not only the official economy, including the finance system, but also the so-called non-economic phenomena, such as a global warming, the care deficit, and the erosion of the public power and all scales. Please, the next. And I conclude my remark here with some reflections. And the first one will be Can we advance can we advance an effective climate agenda without considering the intersections between climate change, gender and racial inequality, and forced displacement? Is the commodification of natures the appropriate solutions, or it's just the convenient solutions for the system? Is it in the interest of global north to end internal and external inequalities, as well as to allow the development of the countries of the global south? You know the answer, but I bring here two reflections. And should you put all our eggs in the Bretton Woods institutional basket, or should you seek alternatives, such as the institutionalizations of BRICS Plus? So I finish here, and I appreciate to be here today, and thank you for all.
Thank you very much, Professor Andrea Dora, for sharing all your thoughts, especially in this topic of gender inequality and energy dichotomy. I would highlight the thoughts that you just presented, including your remarks in terms of energy transition is far from the leader's speech. And it was really well addressed, the topic in relation to climate change, sustainable development, and gender/racial inequality. I think there are highlights of this leaders declaration from BRICS 2025, important points for us to think about and reflect about the role of BRICS, and maybe, as you said in the final remarks, about the institutionalization of the BRICS. Thank you. It's an honor. And I'm going to now pass the word to the researcher Vadim Kuznetsov. Let me just read his mini bio. The researcher Vadim Kuznetsov is a young professional in multilateral energy cooperation. His experience covers youth-led policy and research initiatives on sustainable energy in BRICS, G20, and the UN, including UNESC and ESCAP, ESCAP. Since 2023, Vadim has coordinated the annual BRICS Youth Energy Summit. As a young negotiator, he contributed to the UNFCCC, the COP26-29, and served as youth energy delegate during Indonesia's G20 president. We are honored and really happy to have you here, Vadim. Thanks a lot for your time. Welcome on board. The floor is all yours.
Hello, Jose, and hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. In my presentation, indeed, I will be touching upon the global context of the energy transition, and then narrow it down to technological policies across the BRICS countries, both participating and observer. And finally, we'll also discuss briefly this important, and I would say monumental aspect of the transition, which is the critical energy transition minerals that has long been out of the scope of the global discussion, but has finally found traction in multilateral spaces, including both the UN and BRICS. So let me start with the next slide. Of course, the energy transition stems from the word energy, right? The global context today is that, first, energy is the key emissions contributor in the world. Out of all sectors, we have energy, which accounts for more than 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that is why doing something about it is important. The second point here is that BRICS countries altogether, including both participants and observers, account for more than half, more than 50% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So if we combine these two factors, we will clearly see that energy transition is important, and the global results of this transition will depend largely on what BRICS are doing in this space. However, The second word is transition. And as we understand it correctly, we will notice that it should go from somewhere to somewhere. Transition does not happen at the same place. It needs to move you to another destination. And in this regard, the legitimate question we need to ask ourselves as researchers, as policymakers, as negotiators, as industry representatives, is where are we going to with this transition? And which sources are we substituting with which sources? Here on the slide, I am showing an important snapshot from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe study conducted back in 2021, which, among many other things, has done a wonderful thing. They have calculated the average greenhouse gas emissions during the life cycle of energy technologies in comparison. I would like to highlight here the important paradigm shift that we all need to start adopting in our own research, in our own policy advocacy, is that energy technology, any energy technology, should not be assessed only when it's in its operational phase. You know, solar panels and windmills produce zero CO2 emissions when they are already installed and already operating. But to produce them, you need a lot of resources, which you need a lot of industry engagement, and many of those processes are highly carbon intensive. Despite that, at the moment of decommissioning, when the panels, the windmills, for example, but also nuclear power plants, hydropower plants, when they need to be shifted out and their end of life is coming, then we need to also calculate how much these decommissioning process brings to the environment in terms of emissions. So this whole of life approach, life cycle technology approach, is the one that we need to adopt in our global discussion on energy transition. If we do so, then we should look at the results, because the study has calculated the carbon footprint of the life cycle of many technologies that we are using in the world, starting from traditional fossil fuels and ending up with renewables and nuclear. And what we clearly see is that renewables plus nuclear is this transition destination that we, if we are based on science and not on emotion, that we need to acknowledge. Most importantly, I would like to draw your attention to the score that nuclear energy got in this calculation. If you look at the numbers, you will see that nuclear has the lowest carbon footprint during its life cycle. And this makes me highlight again that the future cannot be only renewable, and it cannot be only nuclear or something only. It should be a combination of available technologies with the least carbon footprint possible. At the same time, we will never have zero carbon technologies. Everything we produce costs us something in terms of emissions. So it's also important to keep this in mind. Let's go to the next slide, please. As we talk about the climate agenda and as COP30 is approaching, I would like to remind us all about the tremendously significant outcomes achieved during COP28 in Dubai. The parties, all the UNFCCC parties, have adopted the first global stocktake that analyzed progress and goals achieved, but also paved the way for future work. And among the many points that are worth attention and which are highlighted here with a special bracket, I would like to draw your attention in particular to clause 28.e. For the first time in COP history, renewables and nuclear are mentioned together in the same line, in the same final document, highlighting that these two technologies, which, as we have just seen on the previous slide, are the least carbon intensive throughout their life cycle, that they need to be integrated together, and they need to be one of the main combinations for the countries participating in the energy transition. I will not stop on other points here, but it's a very significant outcome indeed, because up until that moment, one of the key technologies that powers the energy transition was left on purpose outside the scope of the global discussion. And It was in Dubai back in 2023 at COP28 when renewables and nuclear went together in the same line. We should move on to the next slide, please. Speaking about the global level, we should not forget that, again, the clear leaders of the transition are the BRICS countries, given their industrial scale. You know, if you look at China, Russia, India, Brazil, these are large economies which consume a lot of energy, but also produce a lot of energy. And also that the energy is the key contributing sector. All of that together brings us to a point that we need to understand in detail which technologies these global powers, the BRICS countries, are considering the most relevant for their own investment, for their own transition plans, and for their own strategy planning. On this slide, on the first slide in this series, I have represented in a very visually friendly manner what the BRICS countries, in this case, the 5 first BRICS countries, what they believe to be their key technologies for the transition. I will not go into depth. You can see it on the screen. If something is not highlighted, it does not mean that this country does not invest in technology, right? But there are priorities, and these priorities are reflected in this diagram. What is also important here is that BRICS, although a group of countries having similar objectives, this is a very heterogeneous community. We cannot expect that all BRICS countries want the same type of technology, that all BRICS countries align on everything in the energy agenda. There are differences, just as the conditions for development are different. And in this case, the case of South Africa is very interesting because South Africa, in 2021, right after COP26 in Glasgow, UK, had started its Just Energy Transition Program. This is a multilateral program that includes countries of the G7, as well as multilateral financial institutions, such as the World Bank. And the aim of this program is to help South Africa transition away from coal. South Africa has quite a high share of coal in its energy generation metrics. And this partnership is aimed to accompany South Africa with adequate resources to help phase out coal generation and substitute it with something more clean. At the same time, the success of this program can be questioned at the point because not much has been done yet. Of course, it takes time, especially international finance, but at the same time, it's also telling us a story about the length of the transition, even though when funds are promised and commitments are made, and also tells us a lesson about climate conferences. Because again, it was back in 2021 when this partnership was announced, and now we are in 2025 and the program has not been accomplished yet. So this is all about the need to also diversify your resources, which you are using to power your transition plans. It cannot be just one program or one bank or one source. We need a multiple of options. And in this case, BRICS can also play a role. And next slide, please. Here also the continuation of my analysis, but focused on the newcomer countries. We have the UAE, Egypt, Indonesia, Ethiopia, and Iran. It's important to note here that Ethiopia, apart from other things, is putting a specific emphasis on developing large-scale hydro. It's not that common in other BRICS countries. Well, China does, Brazil does, but Ethiopia is one of the leading global players now in this field in terms of construction timelines and also ambition. Very recently this year, Ethiopia has opened up its large-scale dam in the country. And interestingly, it was financed by local resources without international loans. So it's also giving us an interesting lesson about self-sufficiency. And Iran indeed might be working on more energy technology fronts. But according to its own plans, we know about the peaceful nuclear program. but we don't know more because there is no NDC where we could look it up. So the information in this regard can be researched in more detail. Let's switch to the next point. And now the final part of my presentation, it touches upon a fundamental aspect of the transition, which has long been neglected. You wouldn't find a single side event at COP. You wouldn't find a single event at major international conferences. It's the minerals and the resources, the natural resources we need to use as humanity to produce everything which we believe is clean and green. So if we do the life cycle assessment, it turns out to be not that green and not that clean in the end, because we need to use excessive amounts of these materials. Here, in a graph produced by the International Energy Agency, you might see the difference. You might spot the difference between the amount of resources and minerals used to produce traditional, conventional sources of generation, such as natural gas and coal, with the new ones, or like the alternative ones, with the cleaner ones, which are wind, solar PV, how much more they need to employ in comparison to conventional sources. And this perspective is crucial for us to understand that while the transition is promising many beautiful things, such as self-sufficiency, right, decentralized generation, lower prices, etc., it does not necessarily cancel the challenges that we have been facing in the fossil fuel economy, because the resources which are used are still mined. They still need to be extracted from the underground or even from the deep sea. Some novel stories being currently under development in the International Seabed Authority. Then these materials are highly concentrated globally. So let's look a bit more into what is being done internationally on the next slide. Indeed, as I've mentioned, critical minerals are a precious fuel for the energy transition. Now, the transition is not possible without these materials. But there are some attempts at the global level to finally recognize that there are some issues in coordinating the global approach to this matter and trying to bridge different countries' positions, specifically the global north and the global south positions in regards to critical energy transition minerals. Because I need to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that most mining in the world is taking place in global south and not global north. Not because of the deposits themselves, but also because of regulations. In many cases, you have stricter environmental norms in the global north, which prevents mining. While in the global south, much of this process sometimes takes place in gray economy and is not always traceable. That's why the United Nations last year has convened its first ever United Nations Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals. There were some countries invited to participate at the governmental experts level, including Brazil, including China, including South Africa. South Africa was a co-chair of that group, by the way. And the group worked throughout that year to finally produce a set of 7 voluntary principles for governments to follow in the sector of critical energy transition minerals. You can see them on the screen here. I will not go one by one, but I will draw your attention to the principle number 4, which in my opinion is very relevant to our discussion today. It is about developing benefit sharing, value addition, and helping economic diversification. We can clearly read this principle both ways, for the global north and for the global south. For the global south, value addition and benefit sharing are key components, because as of now, most mining is taking place there, but then no added value is being created. These minerals as raw materials are being taken away abroad via value chains for further value addition, for further industrial processing. And global south countries participating in the panel, and I was honored to be part of that panel as an observer, they were clear about the need to invest in domestic value addition capacities. Indonesia is a nice example of a country where national policies now are aimed at creating more value addition back home. Indonesia, back in 2020, restricted the exports of raw nickel abroad, and Indonesia is one of the key nickel suppliers globally. So the policy is aimed at inviting investors to the country and developing local infrastructure for adding value in different sectors, specifically in the car sector, in electric vehicles sector, to export a more sophisticated product abroad and not just simply nickel that was just mined from the underground. And we will find, if we speak more about it, we will find more examples of countries across the global south, both in Latin America and in Africa and in Asia, that are currently looking into policies to stimulate local value addition instead of simply exporting the raw materials abroad. And again, there is a clear set of trends that we observe globally and that are triggered by the energy transition. The key characteristics here are, again, geographical concentration. Because we are dealing with natural resources, they cannot be found anywhere. They are concentrated in certain parts of the world, such as lithium, mostly in Latin America and Australia, such as cobalt, mostly in Africa, such as nickel, mostly in Indonesia, such as platinum, mostly in South Africa, and so on and so forth. And this represents challenges for importers because they want to diversify their supply chains, but it also represents an opportunity for the exporting countries, for the global south countries, to actually leverage their global power and create more value addition domestically. The next one is about the political conflict potential of these resources. Again, as I've mentioned, many of the problems that were thought to be unique simply for the fossil fuel economy are not that unique in the end, because in this clean energy future, we will still have tariff and non-tariff restrictions. We will still have supply disruptions. We will still have competition for resources. But this time, it's not probably going to be fossil fuels, but it's going to be critical minerals. And you can, read the news and understand it and see it clearly yourselves, what is happening around this domain. And finally, it's also about price volatility. Critical minerals are just the same type of commodity as oil and gas, but at most times being even more volatile and dependent to geopolitical shocks and from market fluctuations than conventional fossil fuel resources. And we also need to remember about this aspect when we, say clean energy transition, because this implies more mining, this implies more exports of these resources, and this also means that global south countries can either start positioning their economies more to exploit the resources they have and create more value addition, but at the same time, it does not mean that they will be less, for example, volatile to price changes in the global market. They will simply, shift from one sector to another. And that's why we need to address this together, including at the BRICS platform, to find the best ways to minimize negative effects and to maximize local jobs, value addition, and also export potential. So with this, I thank you for this opportunity, and we'll be happy to connect online and through my fellow colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vadim Kuznetsov. We are impressed with all the data that you share here today. And you highlighted really well about the transition, which means that it should move you to another place. Where are we going with this transition? Personally speaking, I was really impressed with the data that you provided in terms of the priority energy technologies in BRICS nations, and also about this precious fuel for energy transition. I think that the audience must contact all the keynote speakers here today later on to understand and learn more about all this knowledge and the information that you kindly share here today. I'm gonna pass now the word to Nicole Isis de Ayub. Nicole Isis de Ayub is an economist and lawyer. Dr. Nicole, she is a postdoctoral fellow at the Interdisciplinary Energy Planning Center, NIP, at the University of Campinas in Brazil. She holds a doctorate in economics, a master's degree in economic development, and a bachelor degree in economics from Unicamp, as well as a bachelor degree in law from the Pontifical Catholic University of Campinas in Brazil, PUC Campinas. She was an invited speaker at the World Trade Organization Public Forum in 2023 in Geneva, where she spoke about Brazilian exports and the EU regulation on traditional food World Trade Organization compliance. She's also an associate researcher at the study group on international law on climate change, GEDINC USP of the University of São Paulo. Dr. Nicole, please welcome on board. We are excited to hear your thoughts today. Thanks a lot for joining us.
I will now share some of my slides. Thank you for the very kind introduction. We're going to highlight a lot of what was previously spoken by the other speakers. You're going to see, hopefully it will be a good illustration. Let me just adjust. The first thing, second, it's loading. Well, okay. The first thing I'm going to speak about is on the outline of the current landscape of energy generation in BRICS countries, which Vadim and also Andrea have mentioned before. As we can see, the spectrum of green technologies varies, and some are more green than others. And we see that hydroelectric power is a green technology. However, it's not the most green of all, but it's still better than coal, significantly better. So as we can see in this image here, which shows the main 5 BRICS countries, most of them rely heavily on coal. We see here India, China, and South Africa. South Africa is with almost 81%. The data is the most up-to-date data from the International Energy Agency. It's from 2023, except from Russia, which is from 2022. And we can see a heavy reliance on coal. And when we see the bars, it's pretty clear on the orange bars how significantly larger is the dependence on those 3 countries. And we also have, in this case, Brazil, which relies on hydro for 60% of its energy, of its electricity generation. And along with Brazil, on that team, we also have Ethiopia, that Vadim has mentioned. And we can see here is the only one with basically 100% of energy generation based on renewable technologies. And it has almost 97% of hydropower generating their electricity, with a lot. All the other countries, we see also a lot of blue bars. They are about natural gas, which Russia also has a significant reliance on with 45%. And then the other countries for the Middle East also depend a lot on natural gas. So we're far from being 100% green, but it's also important to notice that despite the graph illustrating a lot of the disparity, it does not show what is the amount of energy that's being produced. We see here in China that only 13.5% of its electricity generation is based on hydro. However, the amount that they generate on this is enough to power Brazil twice over during a year. So the volume is impressive. Andrea had mentioned, or Vadim, I don't remember that China has one of the largest hydro capacities installed, and it's quite significant. So despite China having only 8.4% of its electricity generation based on renewable energies, it's still, when you consider the actual amount that's being generated, considering how huge China is and how much it produces and how much energy it consumes, it's still significant, and any 1 or 2% that they advance is still quite significant for the planet as a whole. So on this note, it's important to say that despite the United States having walked away from their climate commitments, China is doing its part, and each day it's doing even more, as we're going to see. So that's that. But it's also important to say that electricity generation is not the same thing as energy consumption, because when we consume energy, we're still mostly dominated by oil use because of car engines and the energy that we consume on factories and households. So a lot of energy that we need for transportation doesn't come from electricity. So we still emit a lot of carbon, and we still need to capture it somehow. And in this particular sphere, it's important that the carbon capture and storage solutions enter, especially by capturing on site, on the factories, instead while you're going to, for instance, burn coal or oil to power your production. You already capture as much as you can, and you store it safely, so that it mitigates somehow the emissions at some point. But it's also important to say that we see that there is a variety of sources. It's not only coal, it's not only hydro. We see here that the little yellow bar, it's solar PVs. So it's growing. I can't show the growing, the evolution, but it is growing. And most countries have some electricity generation by solar. And when you talk about solar, it's the best part of it is that a great part of the world benefits from sunlight most of the year. And rural areas, not the main cities, also have access to both sun and wind, and they can have some independence in terms of energy generation when we use solar and when we use wind power. However, the problem is we don't have sun during 24 hours, and it's important to store this energy, because what ends up happening, and it has happened in Brazil, and as I've read, it has happened in South Africa as well, there is an overproduction of electricity based on solar during some parts of the year, and this energy isn't consumed, it goes to waste. So there is a need to store it, and you can mostly store it in batteries, big batteries, the same type of batteries that you're going to use on electric vehicles. And those batteries, they require a lot of minerals, a big amount of minerals, which drives up demand for them quite a lot. The senator had mentioned the numbers for how many electric vehicles are being produced by China. China is flooding the world with electric vehicles, flooding every country that allows them in. So the US is going to put a barrier. Even the EU has barriers for the entrance of Chinese electric vehicles, but meaning tariffs. So there are a lot of them, a lot of production. So that's the main point of where we're coming from and where the pressure is coming from. Now let's move on to the technologies. What can we see here is that who within the BRICS countries owns the most patent inventions on green technology. A lot of technologies that are used are no longer protected by patents. We can see, for instance, you can generate hydropower without relying on up-to-date tech. However, when you're going to build a new plant a new power plant, you're going to use construction techniques that can be green. You're going to use materials that can be green, not only in its formulation, but in its production as well. As Vadim said, it takes not just, you're not going to measure how much carbon we're emitting only when it's installed, but while it's being installed as well. So all this needs to be accounted for. So here we see that China is by far leading this race. When Senator mentioned that most tech is Chinese, they have been growing this since 2015, 2018. They already had a very big spike on their numbers. And here I'm using specifically a classification, a technical classification that's going to classify on what type of green technology it is. So we can see a tech profile from the countries. Okay, so China is incomparable. If I had to put China on scale on the map, everyone would shrink so much, it would look like everyone has 0 inventions. So I decided to put a big number. China currently has either pending or already granted over 3 million patent inventions. It means one invention which can be protected in several countries at once by many patents, but it's more than 3 million actual inventions. However, most of them are inside China. So that's it. This is making the calculations, comparing the entire world, the patents all over the world. But when we see specifically inside the United States Patent Office, because when you decide a technology is important, you're going to you're going to protect it not only inside your own country, but you're going to protect it everywhere else that you think is commercially important for you. And the United States is still a very good proxy to know which technologies are important and which technologies the companies put more faith in or may be more advanced. There are many reasons. So when we see here that China is the leading one, we see that Russia seems to come right after with 11,000 technologies. India comes with 2.7 thousand technologies, and Brazil almost 2,000 technologies, and South Africa with almost 500. However, when we see only inside the United States, we see that China, instead of the 3 million patents, it has 34,000. It's a lot less, but still quite a lot. And instead of having Russia leading, we now have India. And why is that, we ask? So let's have a brief look at what's the profile. I have simplified the data for brevity, and we see that in Brazil, most of the technology that we patent is related to adaptation, not mitigation technology for mitigating carbon emissions, but for adapting to the effects of climate change. When we talk about Russia, nearly all their tech that's currently protected is on nuclear energy. It's clearly a winner in that regard. And as we can see in its electricity generation, it's also the country with most relies on nuclear energy, with almost 20% of its generation coming from nuclear. So when it translates abroad, from those more than 11,000 patents, we shrink to 255 patents, probably the most important for that market. But when you see India, from the almost 3,000, we have almost 1,000, okay, almost 900 patents in the United States. And why is that? What India protects is energy, production techniques, adaptation techniques, and transports. Transport technology can include cars, buses, airplanes, rockets, but mostly it's car, motorcycles, and the companies that most protect are the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, Tata Motors, Indian Oil, and TVS Motors. We can see when you look at patent data that a lot of the patents are by companies that are not green, but are trying to be green or to mitigate the effects of their production processes. So that counts as a green patent because you're working towards that. When it comes to Brazil, we mostly have Petrobras, Braskem, Embraer, Vale, and Fiocruz as the main inventors. Why is Fiocruz there? For the Brazilians watching, Fiocruz is related to the health sector. You don't really think, why is it related to climate change? Well, as Senator mentioned, and as we all know, the climate is getting warmer and warmer, and with this come new and newer diseases. And a lot of insects happen to proliferate and multiply, and more people get sick. So when you invent some vaccines or medication or any drugs or things related to the diseases that have some connection with climate change, that counts as a green patent and a green invention. But still, and we also have, of course, I need to mention South Africa, they also have especially patents on mining and production techniques. The mining is quite interesting there. But even when we think worldwide, China is still the most important. And what do they patent? They patent not only energy, but they also patent, this here, batteries, a lot of batteries, especially in the United States, lithium batteries. They also have, it's not shown here, but the most mining patents related to mining techniques. And this mining, not including coal mining or all type of mining, is mostly related to batteries, electrical vehicles, and other green tech mining. China leads on that front. And it also leads on rare earth patents technology. Lithium is not rare earth, it's a critical mineral, but it's not among the rare earth ones. But it's still there. And what do they research in it? They try to find new techniques, new uses for the same minerals, more efficient ways to use it. And it doesn't do it only within its borders. I'm going to go to the next slide as a curiosity. If you're curious what the other BRICS countries do, they really don't stand out, unfortunately, which is expected. It's an expected number, an expected result. But when we see Indonesia has 135 green inventions. But when we see what are those, they are from a Chinese company, by a Chinese company, operates in Indonesia. And what does it do? Recycling techniques to extract minerals from industrial waste. It uses recycling to obtain nickel and everything else. So it's actually working inside Indonesia to improve its place in the global value chain and add more value. It's a Chinese company within Indonesia, but it's still benefiting the country in some way. So, and the smaller countries mostly protect their tech everywhere, not inside their own countries, but in other countries, because you're going to protect your technology in places where you believe you're going to have more profit from, where it's going to be commercially exploited. So with that, just to summarize, it's very clear that China is leading the way into green technology, into the green transition, and even if it produces is no longer patent protected, it's still a main driver in, for instance, photovoltaics, the solar energy. It was also China that made it go cheaper and more widely available. If not for China and for its efforts, it would not have the same diffusion that we have right now. It would still be, I don't know if it would still be, but even if it started in the global north with the research, it was the Chinese that made it able to a large scale and to be able to be exported. And we see in Brazil and in other countries, people use it for their households' electricity, and they benefit a lot from what the Chinese did to, let's call it this way, democratize everything in a way. Of course, they profit from it, but it's still a very great benefit for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, researcher Dr. Nicole Ayub, for your insights, your valuable insights on the BRICS technological profile based on green patents. It's impressive, the data that you showed about who holds the most patent green inventions. And it's very curious to see that China is leading in terms of batteries and energy, and Russia is the second one with the nuclear energy. I would like also to address to the audience. Well, we have audience from Switzerland, Gabon, Ethiopia, Brazil. It's a very mixed international wide. If you want to receive the certificate issued by the BRICS study group, please fill in the link with your data to receive later on the certificates while attending this 9th conference of BRICS from the BRICS study group of the University of São Paulo. Now I'm going to pass the word to the researcher Jordan McLean, who is speaking from South Africa. Researcher Jordan McLean is a climate change policy researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs. She holds a master's degree in political science from the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, where her research centered on social protection in Africa and the Universal Basic Income Grant. Her research focuses on the intersections of the development, energy, and climate agendas of Global South countries in groupings such as the G20 and the BRICS, and coordinates the work of the Think 20 South Africa under South Africa's G20 presidency. So, researcher Jordan McLean, thanks a lot for joining us. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And let me also just extend my appreciation to the university and the 9th conference, the 9th BRICS conference, for inviting me to share some insights with you all today. It's really great to hear that we have such a diverse group of people that are listening to us talk all things BRICS and climate and energy. So as mentioned, a lot of my work this year has actually focused on the G20, as South Africa is the current president of the G20 for 2025. But I thought that it's still relevant for me to take you through some of the work that the BRICS grouping is doing as a smaller constituency of the G20. So as some of you may know, almost all the BRICS countries, even now that we have expanded the BRICS grouping, are G20 countries, except for the United Arab Emirates and Egypt, who are actually invited members this year under South Africa's presidency to join the G20 negotiations. And then, of course, while Saudi Arabia is not an official BRICS member state, Saudi Arabia is a G20 state. So there's a lot of work that we can look at, and a lot of the agenda pushing and narrative formation that we can look at from the BRICS perspective within the G20. Also, I think important to note is that the last 4 presidencies of the G20 have been led by BRICS member states. So if we go back to 2022, that would be Indonesia, 2023, India, 2024, of course, Brazil, and this year being led by South Africa. And South Africa closes out the first complete cycle of G20 presidencies before the presidency is handed back to the United States to begin the second cycle. Related to energy, I thought it's actually quite interesting to trace how exactly BRICS countries have dealt with the energy portfolio within the G20, and how they are leveraging the G20 platform to advance a more global South-oriented energy transition and climate agenda. And this is because the G20 is such a critical platform because it brings together key economies from the developed world, and that would be the G7 states that Vajim actually mentioned before, as well as some of the bigger emerging economies from the global south and from the BRICS grouping as well. So if we just go through what Indonesia had accomplished in the G20 presidency, that actually come up with the Bali Energy Transitions Roadmap, and they'd also done a stock-taking exercise on access, technology, and finance in the context of the energy transition, looking very closely at themes such as securing energy accessibility, scaling up smart and clean energy technologies, and advancing financing for energy. And then we see India that had built upon this sort of foundation and came up with a number of voluntary principles and action plans related to energy and climate, including some voluntary principles on hydrogen, some voluntary principles on critical minerals for energy transitions, an action plan to double the global rate of energy efficiency improvement by 2030, another action plan for lowering the cost of finance for energy transitions, and then a final action plan for promoting renewable energy to accelerate universal energy access. And this is just a reflection of some of their main agenda topics in the presidency, which looked at issues related to energy security, diversifying supply chains, universal energy access, as well as touching upon addressing technology gaps for the energy transitions, which we know is quite key based off of the last two presentations of our last two speakers that looked at technology and renewable technologies within the BRICS, as well as India also tried to focus on low-cost financing for energy transitions from the perspective of the global south. And then with Brazil in 2024, there were a number of key documents and initiatives that Brazil was able to achieve. I will just highlight three. So the first would be, the first and probably one of the most innovative is the Principles for Just and Inclusive Energy Transitions. And this has really been a foundational document that builds on what we were able to achieve in Indonesia within the G20 and is following all the way through to some of the objectives that South Africa would like to achieve this year. There was also the roadmap on clean cooking strategies, as well as a roadmap to increase investment in clean energy for developing economies. And this reflected Brazil's overall sort of G20 agenda for energy, which was around accelerating finance, especially for emerging market and developing economies, looking at the social dimension of the energy transition. So not just reforming the energy sector, but the implications this will have on different communities and different vulnerable groups. And then finally, also looking at some sustainable fuels and what kind of perspectives the G20 can curate around those issues. And so obviously South Africa trying to go out quite strongly as the last developing country G20 presidency has a long list of proposed deliverables. These have been quite difficult to get over the line. Of course, the geopolitical space is always changing. And so sometimes it is quite difficult for the G20 agenda to respond as quickly as probably necessary to geopolitical changes. But I think South Africa has tried to keep up their ambition that has been put in place from Brazil, India, and Indonesia. So quite critically, the Energy Transitions Working Group in the G20 is looking at developing a G20 energy security framework, as well as picking up on some of the work from India, from Indonesia as well, related to energy access and energy efficiency, and then building on what Brazil was able to achieve by also looking at clean cooking infrastructure and whether an investment roadmap can be negotiated in that regard. They've also taken the approach, which was really throughout all the developing country presidencies, but definitely most prominently within India and within Brazil, which is to actually host a lot more dialogues that include multi-stakeholder groups. So there's been a few that have actually that they have planned or have already taken place that relate to small modular reactors, so picking up on some of the innovations that are going on in the nuclear space. As Vajim also mentioned, this is an exciting new area for renewable energy, as well as hosting some roundtables of ministers from key G20 economies on pertinent issues like energy access, clean cooking, sustainable financing. Also, because this is the first African and the only African G20 presidency so far, there's been a considerable effort put into bringing African issues to the forefront. So there have been some discussions related to green industrial hubs, in Africa, and how do we catalyze African development in that sense? How do we look at pooled capacity and regional and country support for critical areas? And again, looking at some of what Brazil was able to do. So looking at socio-economic safeguards and looking at the social dimensions of the energy transition. As well, the presidency is working on affordable and inclusive transitions. There is also a roadmap that they are looking at related to clean hydrogen for hard to abate sectors, which has really been something the G20 has been working on for a long time. And then again, related to Africa, there is this idea of working with other G20 states around how can we set up an infrastructure investment plan for Africa's cross-border projects, which would be very interesting to bring in some of our other developed country or other BRICS partners onto the continent, and usually South Africa provides one of those gateways. So overall, the themes of South Africa's Energy Transitions Working Group has looked at energy security, affordable and reliable access to energy, which is a pressing issue for the African continent. You may know that there is a partnership with the World Bank and the African Development Bank related to trying to electrify 600 million people that don't have access to electricity on the continent, and they're trying to do that in stages and trying to do that in a sustainable and very inclusive way. As well, of course, always the topic of the just, affordable and inclusive energy transitions, drawing on the successful voluntary principles that Brazil announced last year. And then, of course, African interconnectivity. It's a central theme for the African Union, and South Africa has worked really hard to include African perspectives as far as possible. But not all of work on energy is taking place within the Energy Transitions Working Group. In the Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group, which I had the privilege of participating in, they are really driving the concept of whole of economy, whole of society in transitions. So looking beyond just the energy structure, how do we engineer an entire sort of the society, transitioning the economy to a more sustainable sort of future trajectory to keep in line with our planetary limits. So all of this work is still currently ongoing within the G20 presidency. I think it's also important to note that with some of the geopolitical changes that we have seen and some of these shifts that are taking place, one of the main challenges for South Africa as a representative of the global South within the G20 and trying to drive a G20 agenda is that there has been considerable backsliding on climate commitments within the G20 within the global space, but that has affected how the G20 can work on climate and energy topics. And so a central challenge will be for the BRICS, for South Africa's presidency and for the BRICS to not lower their ambition on the transition, and that there still now exists an opportunity because there is a little bit of a vacuum within the climate space in terms of leadership for developing economies to really make their agenda known. And I think Brazil in particular is playing a very important role in that regard. They've had the G20 presidency, the BRICS and COP at the same time. And President Lula has been very clear about his ambitions around the climate agenda. So I think this really places Brazil as a country for its BRICS friends to support in terms of continuing to drive a global South climate agenda. And then finally, I think I do want to touch on some of the work related to critical minerals. As Vajim has pointed out, this is a very, very critical area for us in terms of advancing renewable energy development across developing economies, but it's also placed Africa in a very interesting position as it's kind of existing right now as a playing ground for different developed and developing country partners as they seek access to minerals that South Africa and Africa have huge resources of. So I think it was an IMF study that actually has said that Africa is home to about 30% of what we know and what has been geologically surveyed of critical minerals. So it's very important from South Africa's point of view to drive an agenda related to critical minerals within the G20. And so they've proposed a very ambitious agenda within the Energy Transitions Working Group overall, but South Africa has also established a standalone task force, and it is called the task force. It has a very long name. Task force related to inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and reduced inequality. And the idea there is to develop a G20 framework on critical minerals. Obviously, this is very contentious. You have some of the biggest, the countries that host the biggest multinational mining companies, as well as some of the countries that host the biggest reserves of critical minerals, trying to negotiate a win-win framework from both of their perspectives on an issue that is heavily securitized like critical minerals. But I think South Africa is working very closely with its developing country partners to really get something across the line that is inclusive and takes into account some of those principles that were highlighted by the UN special panel that Virginia had presented on. But critical minerals is not being introduced by South Africa for the first time. India and Brazil did reiterate their support in the leaders' declarations for reliable and diversified supply chains for the global energy transition, including for critical minerals to be beneficiated at source, as well as to be used for various renewable energy technologies. As well, you do see mention of critical minerals within the BRICS leaders declarations and the BRICS energy transitions ministerial declarations in a very consistent manner. So this is an area where the Global South, as represented by BRICS, has been working on for a much longer time. Then as well, what we saw with the Brazilian presidency was that the energy transitions ministerial meetings, they did make various commitments on critical minerals, and through Brazil's presidency, they committed to promoting reliable and diversified supply chains, which are very critical for renewable energy technology development across the South, but also for the global North. India as well proposed that set of voluntary high-level principles on critical minerals that I've already mentioned. And there they include recognition about how important critical minerals actually are for the energy transition, and that local value creation needs to be promoted as far as possible to start spurring on industrial development in mineral-rich economies. And then, of course, in Brazil's principles for just and inclusive energy transitions, which is not just Brazil's principles, it's global principles that apply globally, but that have been driven by the Brazilian government. They also include reference to the importance and the criticality of minerals, especially as it pertains to creating value for local economies. And then what we did see in the anti-corruption working group, and this is under Indonesia's presidency, is that they did highlight and develop a background note on mitigating corruption risks in renewable energy, which is very important for the mineral space, because as Vajin mentioned, sometimes in southern economies, a lot of the minerals development and mining industries operate in a very gray zone, and there are quite substantial risks, not only to the economies related to corruption and offshoring of revenue, but also related to the communities that are living on the ground, and how their needs and their rights are not always considered as mining is developed. So South Africa is basically trying to use its G20 presidency as a platform to bring different countries together, producer countries and consumer countries together to try and develop these principles to support some of the principles that were highlighted by the UN panel, and how do we start moving from principle phase to implementation phase, but also to further define the role that G20 countries can play in addressing some of these core obstacles to developing equitable and sustainable and secure critical mineral value chains amid all of the trade disruptions that we're experiencing and the geopolitical disruptions that we have as well. And all of this is to say that, South Africa plays a very interesting role, because not only are we a critical supplier of the platinum group metals, but we are also a recipient of the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which has already been explained and was established in 2021. It has taken very long for credible outputs to be seen as part of the Just Energy Transition Partnership, but I still think that it offers many lessons to other BRICS members that also have a Just Energy Transition Partnership, like Indonesia, that has a similar kind of setup, a similar framework of international financing that's been packaged solely for transitioning the energy sector. I think some of the issues that relate to that is that it is very difficult to sort of earmark certain funds to have certain results, because the energy sector does not exist alone. It's highly dependent on by other sectors, especially for South Africa in manufacturing and in the mining sector. So you need to approach the energy transition with a sort of whole of economy kind of framing that is emerging from the Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group. Also, I think this is also related to some issues around global financing and the architecture of global financing. And it's very important to understand that from developing countries, the cost of financing as compared to our global north partners is very elevated, and that's another priority of South Africa through its G20 platform, is to talk about the cost of capital. And this is not a new argument. This has been one of the central objectives of BRICS, and what initially brought the BRICS together following the financial crisis, is to actually talk about how global financial architecture is constructed, and how can emerging economies, developing economies, the fastest growing economies right now, how can they influence the reforming of the architecture. So I think in closing, I just want to highlight that as the G20 arena becomes more difficult and more politicized, I think it really raises the importance of the work that the BRICS is doing on the climate agenda, and it needs us as researchers, as the policy community, to be tracking and to be talking about how the BRICS is still using its other platforms to drive a global South friendly agenda. So the United States has indicated that they will reduce the topics that are covered in the G20, and that is within their rights as a president of the G20. But then I think that goes again to my point that the BRICS then become an even more important platform for the global South to advance a sustainable agenda. We also, I think it's important to note that while the BRICS is sort of sits within the G20, the link between the two platforms is very important for us to take note of. The G20 has a different level of access because of the interests of developed economies within the grouping, that allows BRICS members like South Africa to take the platform and to make very important statements at very important convenings, such as the UN General Assembly a few weeks ago, and at the IMF and World Bank annual meetings also a few weeks ago, to continue to elevate what the global South or what developing economies are trying to say on critical financing issues. But always they will mention energy and the climate agenda. So I think I will leave it there, but it's been very great as well to share these insights with you and to hear from my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, researcher Jordan McLean, directly from South Africa. Thanks a lot for sharing the energy security framework, in which you also highlighted a lot about the importance of the projects being held, not only in South Africa, but within the African continent as a whole, in terms of the cross-border projects in the inclusive energy transition. Now, last but not least, I'm going to pass the word to the professor and researcher, Milena Meg. Milena Meg is an energy transition policy expert with nearly 80 years of experience, especially for BRICS countries. She was the first Brazilian to graduate with honors in international relations from MGIMO University in Russia. She was a specialization in design of renewable energy projects by Harvard and BRICS by Fudan University, and is currently pursuing postgraduate studies in energy planning and analysis at the University of São Paulo. She worked as co-chair at the T20 under Brazil's G20 and BRICS presidency, leading discussions on energy policies. Currently, Milena Megre is part of the study group of BRICS in the University of São Paulo, serves as a municipal youth counselor at Belo Horizonte City Hall in Minas Gerais state in Brazil, and is working under the Brazilian presidents in COP30 in Belém, the UN Climate Change Conference in Brazil. Milena Megre, it's a pleasure to have you here once more, one more year together in this 9 BRICS conference. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introductions. I'm really happy to be here. Greetings, everyone, from the southernmost point of Brazil. Maybe not the southernmost point, but the southern state of Brazil. I'm currently in Rio Grande do Sul. Just waiting for the presentation. Let me know when you see it, please.
1 second.
While she's checking the presentation, you may feel free to start, okay?
Thank you. Wonderful. So let's go ahead. The point of my presentation, and I always like to work with a question. We have been seeing, especially for Brazil, that we have been pursuing an international agenda that covers G20, BRICS, and now COP30. And my main point in this presentation is to show you how the climate agenda is shaping global governance for the global south, because those agendas, G20, BRICS, they are not necessarily only about climate. Neither is COP30. COP is mainly about climate, of course, but the other ones aren't. And how is the climate agenda actually shaping for the global south? And one other thing that I really appreciate to add here is that I'm going to be zooming in Brazil and zooming out for the BRICS perspective back and forth throughout this presentation. So next slide, please. This is the main question that I wanted to keep focused, and we're going to answer this together. How is COP30, the event that is being hosted by Brazil and is absolutely related to the climate agenda, how is it essential to advancing the Global South agenda? Next slide, please. Before we even get to this topic, I just really would like to take 1 minute for us to look at this image and to absorb it and understand who are the BRICS countries. We have been talking so much about the expansion, the new members, partners, but sometimes we don't really absorb and we don't really look into it and see what are the BRICS countries now. So we have the 5 original members that we know, that are part of the acronym. We have the 5 new full members that were invited, and then we have 10 partners. And so now we have over 20 BRICS countries that are officially part of the BRICS countries, and 3 members in who's essentially spending. Next slide, please. And I want to take one step back to analyze climate conferences over time. The first ever climate conference that we had was the First World Climate Conference. The name, it's quite self-explanatory, in 1979, when the meteorologists were showing how the temperature on Earth and many other climate conditions were changing. But then what I want to highlight here is right before the first COP we ever had, COP first in Berlin, we had another very important event hosted in Brazil called Rio 92, hosted in 1992. And then 20 years later, we had in 2012, Rio plus 20. And now we're going to have COP30. So even though this is the first time we're hosting COP30 in Brazil, and we're not quite sure if this is going to happen again because we have so many countries in the world to host COP30. It's quite unlikely for a COP to be hosted in the same country twice. This is the 3rd time we're hosting a very important large event in cooperation with the United Nations. So this is not the first time. I'm not sure COP is not going to be the last time. It may be the last COP, but it's not going to be the last climate event on our agenda. And then I'm going to move to the next slide so we can just try to reflect on this, the fact that we have had 3 previous large UN partners partnering events with the UN, and then now we're moving towards COP30. And then let's go to the BRICS summit this year. The Brazilian government divided the agenda of this year into two. The first semester was dedicated to the BRICS agenda, and then the second part is being highly dedicated to COP. But what I want to highlight from the main points of the BRICS summit, we from the GBRICS group of the University of São Paulo, we have been to the BRICS summit this year in Rio de Janeiro. And I personally, one of my main points that I was expecting for this summit edition was to see a huge debate around the institutionalization of the group itself. Since we have expanded, I was expecting to see a lot of clear understandings on why did it expand, what are the rules for expansion, what are the obligation of partners, what are the obligation of the new full members. I was expecting that they were going to debate a lot about this, and we even published, me and my colleague Otávio, we published in the GBRICS website an interesting review about this, our expectations for the BRICS summit 1 or 2 days before it. And our expectations were not met, but this was good on the other hand, because we noticed that the BRICS summit was a preparation for COP30 and the following events, such as G20 South Africa and so many others. Together with my colleagues here, Nicole, Andrea, we have done a series of presentations also covering some of the points that were mentioned regarding the climate agenda of BRICS and the summit as well, and even published an article on the GBRICS website. But what I want to look here is how, and notice very, very well, how even though the summit is about BRICS countries, all the points that they're making here, they are very related to COP30. So one of the things that was in the final document of the BRICS summit is that they have mentioned that the current system that we have in the world in the international relations for the climate agenda prevents the global south countries from carrying out an energy transition due to a lack of resources. So this points out to a lot of, was mentioned here largely by Jordan, an energy transition that needs to be inclusive, it needs to be equal, needs to be fair. So this is one point that the BRICS summit was pointing out. And another point is that the financing part should be the responsibility of the global north countries. This is a debate that was going back and forth during the last COP in Azerbaijan, COP29. This was a long debate and it got to a dispute somehow, because we're looking towards $1.3 trillion for climate financing, and we reached $300 billion. It tripled the amount from Dubai, but however, it was considered highly insufficient. So the BRICS countries, they were calling for structural changes to make financing for the energy transition, for for the climate agenda in general, more accessible. And they were reaffirming one point that is very important when we reach the point of COP30, is that they reaffirm the principle of the Paris Agreement, which is the common but differentiated responsibilities. And what does it mean? It means that we acknowledge and we understand the historical responsibility that many countries had. For instance, in the Industrial Revolution, the countries that benefited from the Industrial Revolution in emitting greenhouse gases to advance their economies, and yet have a large amount of pollution in the planet, and that those countries are mostly located in the global north countries, that they therefore have a larger responsibility of financing this transition, especially from the global south countries, who not only did not benefit from the Industrial Revolution, but they were also extracted. They were part of the extraction of the Industrial Revolution in many ways and in many other forms throughout the centuries, also with colonization, so on and so forth. So they want us to take into account context, otherwise the transition will not be equal. And another point that was very interesting, and it was largely mentioned here, we know that BRICS countries, a lot of the current BRICS countries, they have large reserves of oil and gas, even coal, and they use it extensively. But one point that was mentioned in the BRICS summit this year in the document is that they should receive proportional support in regards to their ambition. So the larger the ambition, the larger their willingness to move away from fossil fuels, the larger the financing should be. So in the way to be equal and fair to everyone. Next slide, please. And here, I think the slide kind of changed a little bit the design, but I hope you can follow follow up here. Just want to clarify, because whenever we talk about energy transition, we say renewables and fossil fuels. But whenever we use this terminology, we're missing out something very important, which is the clean energy sources that we have. So follow up with me here on the right in green color. I'm not sure everyone can see the color green, but let's see. For the renewables, we have tide, hydro, solar, waste, wind, biofuels, and geothermal. For the second sphere that we have here, we have the clean energy, and we notice a new one. We notice nuclear energy. It was mentioned here. I even saw there's a question in the group chat, in the chat about this, and we're going to touch upon this. It's very important that we say clean energy, because otherwise we're missing that out and we're leaving a lot of space for misinformation regarding nuclear. Nuclear is clean, but is non-renewable, which goes to our fourth sphere of non-renewable sources, which is nuclear. And then we move to the fossil fuels, non-renewable, oil, gas, and coal. Next slide, please. And now this is to sum up our point. I want you to take a look. The first line, we have the Brazilian International Leadership Agenda, G20 last year, this year, BRICS and COP30. And now let's look attentively to the G20 presidencies in the past year. 2022, we had Indonesia, next India, then Brazil and South Africa, 4 BRICS countries. COP presidency, we had Egypt, the UAE, we had Azerbaijan and Brazil. Azerbaijan is not part of BRICS. However, it's a former Soviet state and is part of the global south. Next year, the G20 presidency is going to the USA, and COP presidency is going to Australia or Turkey, but more likely we're seeing the movement towards Australia. What are we seeing here? We're seeing a series of presidencies from the past years of G20 and COP, moving from a global south agenda, a global south hosting perspective, shifting now to the global north. So what are we doing here? South Africa and Brazil, especially because we are the last ones to hold these presidencies. We are trying to establish what we call the global south legacy. We are trying to align ourselves with our partners, whether it's within BRICS or the larger sphere of global south, to make sure that we are on the same page regarding the climate agenda, the climate goals, and how we are going to position ourselves in larger debate spaces such as the G20, such as COP, the future COPs as well. How are we going to make our demands? How are we going to set our targets for climate change, for our ambitions? And this, how are you going to argue together as a group? Because otherwise, if we don't reach consensus beforehand, if we do not learn how to position ourselves in the climate agenda, when we move to the next COP presidency, when we move to the next G20 presidency, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be so harmonious for us to debate and to demand this climate finance that we have been struggling so long to achieve. Next slide, please. So again, to answer the question, how the climate agenda is shaping the global governance for the global south. The international agenda, and here we are talking about G20, COP presidencies, BRICS, and now COP30. So this international agenda in the previous years have been consolidating the legacy of the global south for the future. For us to go to COP31 in Australia next year, for us to go to G20 USA next year, we need to know how we're going to position ourselves as a group. Where do we stand together? How far will we go as a group? Because in some other points, we can just go further, maybe individually or maybe in smaller groups. Perhaps some groups are more ambitious towards abandoning fossil fuels. They are more capable of doing so than others, but we know where we stand together as BRICS. And this is the most important, that we know how to move to the future presidencies together without breaking this alignment that we have consolidated for the past 4 and 5 years of presidencies. So next slide, please. This is it. Thank you so much for your attention. I'll be happy to have your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Researcher Milena Megri, for this in-depth presentation in terms of the G20, the BRICS, and the COP30, in terms of how the climate agenda is shaping the global governance for the global south. really appreciate this time of all our panelists. We have received a lot of questions from the audience, but unfortunately, being time-wise, we do have only 4 minutes because we will finish at 10:05 this presentation in order to give the word to the next panel, which will be Peace, Security, and Cooperation in the New Global Order, which will begin at 10:15. So I would address this question that was highlighted by the audience in terms of what we can expect from the BRICS plus countries during the COP30, as we're going to have this 2025 UN Climate Change Conference in Belém, in Brazil. So I would give the word to our keynote speakers. You may have 1 minute to highlight your expectations about this COP30 that's just coming in the next few days here in Brazil. I would give the word firstly to Milena Meg, and for those who are willing to add more information, please feel free. The floor is all yours, please.
Thank you so much. So I see that we had 2 questions. One was what we can expect from the BRICS plus countries during COP30. I believe I tried to answer as much as I could throughout my presentation. So kindly let me know, the person who asked this question, I believe was Jonas from Switzerland. Let me know if this was answered. Then the second question, I really enjoyed it, and I wish Vadim was here because he would make a great contribution to this, which is considering the limited time left to reach net zero globally and the long planning and construction period of nuclear energy, does the energy transition mainly need to happen with renewables? And I think this is such a great point, and I could go so long talking about this, but since to respect the time, and I really want to hear from the other colleagues here, we need all of them. We need the renewables, we need the nuclear energy, and good news for everyone. I know that nuclear energy, nuclear power plants take a long time, between 20 years to be built, but now we are developing, and it's almost reaching the point to go to the market, the small modular reactors, which are SMRs. They are smaller nuclear reactors that are going to take up to 10 years to be built, maybe less. They are less costly, they are easier to transport, and this is going to change the future of nuclear energy. I highly recommend for you to check some of the latest reports of the International Energy Agency, the IA, on nuclear. We are going to see a boost in energy in this. But just to close up my point, we need renewables and we need nuclear because we need to maintain energy security. We need to make sure that this is going to go smoothly because, as Jordan and Vadim, Andrew and Nicole, everyone mentioned, all of them depend on critical minerals. If we go for just one energy source, we're going to be highly dependent. Everything in the value chain and the critical mineral, the chain of critical minerals and the cycle to build every single technology, it's very sensitive. So we need to make sure that we have a very diverse energy and electricity mix. And nuclear needs to be part of this in order to make sure that we're going to have the electricity available for everyone. They can produce a huge amount of electricity, and this is very important to reach net zero by 2050. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if anyone wants to add any other comments before we finish our panel.
I will just add 30 seconds more onto Milena. I think Milena has already covered it, but in terms of what we would expect from BRICS, from COP30 and what we expect of the BRICS plus, I think just talking from an African perspective, Africa hosted its second Africa Climate Summit this year. It was hosted in Ethiopia, and it was also very, very clear about what we are asking from our global partners in terms of engineering the transition and to advance action on climate change. Africa is a region that will be really devastatingly affected by rising heat very soon, especially the country that I'm in, South Africa, northern parts of South Africa, are already consumed by drought. So I think what we're looking to Brazil as the host to be very ambitious and to really drive the negotiations, and as well for the other BRICS members to drive a very developmental, sustainable sort of climate agenda through
the negotiations of COP. Always when we approach COP, we are asking for ambition and we get disappointed. I think we get disappointed because we need more and more ambition every year. But the BRICS countries are already sort of trying their best to advance something that is ambitious, something that is inclusive, that looks at different communities and different needs, coming from a region that is the global majority. So I think as long as we can see some reflection of inclusivity, some reflection of solidarity with vulnerable groups, I think the BRICS Plus can really deliver through the negotiations. But other than that, I think Milena has covered it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have received over 10 questions here in the chat, besides all the questions sent directly to the organizers. But unfortunately, time-wise, we need to stop because we also do have a very interesting panel coming within 10 minutes. So I would like to address my special thanks to Senator Mushahid Hussein and to all professors and researchers, including Andrea Doria, Vadim Kuznetsov, Nicole Isdeayub, Jordan McLean, and Milena Mack for joining us and sharing your valuable thoughts. Please stay tuned, have some rest, 10 minutes rest, and go back. We have a special link. It's a different link from this transmission to listen to the thoughts of the keynote speakers in terms of the peace, security, and cooperation in the new global order that is also part of this 9th conference of BRICS from the BRICS study group of the University of São Paulo. And we also would like to address our special thanks to the supporters, including Martins Villac Advogados, a law office in Brazil, for LIDI China, and for Ibrashina Institute, especially for not only the support, but also the transmission of this whole 9th conference of BRICS from the BRICS study group of the University of São Paulo. This transmission will be recorded. You may watch it afterwards by YouTube. And I hope that you enjoyed this 2 hours conversation with all these experts. And thank you very much for everything here. Thank you. Have a nice day. Have a good rest. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.